The way that Bitcoin's price is moving right now looks suspiciously like the double top of 2021. And I'm here to tell you whether or not we're going to see another crash or if we're going to see Bitcoin continue to rip upward. Welcome back to your brand new episode of Gen Z BTC. It's me, Satoshi Guapamoto. And at the end of the day, anyone who says that they can predict the future in the short term is always wrong, right? Because that's not true. You cannot predict Bitcoin's short term price action. You can only predict the long term. In the long term, it's going up forever. But in terms of the double top and then leading into another crash or bear market, most likely we're not going to see that happen. And the reason why is the fundamentals. All right. A lot of these kids like to draw lines and do technical analysis. That is analog thinking that does not work on a global reserve asset that performs 24/7 and unlike anything that we've ever seen before. Okay. I understand that TA is supposed to be more about human psychology, but when it comes to a finite asset like Bitcoin, it's just not going to work because we're going to witness S curve adoption at some point. It could be now, probably not, but when that point happens, all your models are destroyed to the upside, right? Godzilla has come to the playground. All of your models are dead. But what are the fundamentals that make Bitcoin so strong right now? First, we have to think about macro, all right? A lot of these guys don't understand anything about the bigger picture when it comes to Bitcoin as an asset class, okay? Bitcoin is not just some tiny meme coin toy that's going to go to zero at any point now. There is a macro thesis to be analyzed here. So the first thing I would say is interest rates, right? The interest rates haven't even been cut yet. Think about that. And we are soaring past all-time highs and eyeing more. And the reason why that's important is because when the government, specifically the US government, because we're one of the largest economies in the world, everyone typically likes to follow our lead, but this time we're lagging behind. We haven't cut interest rates at all yet. And when that does happen, that means that the cost of money, the cost to borrow is going to go down. Businesses typically want to expand during this. They want to take out bigger loans. They want more access to more money. This increases liquidity. This increases the velocity of money, the speed at which money trades its hands, right? And that's all going to accelerate Bitcoin's price action because Bitcoin is a liquidity sponge. Bitcoin reacts very strongly to liquidity. We saw this very obviously back in the COVID shock, right? When Bitcoin was ripping from $10,000 to $70,000, essentially, because interest rates were sent to zero. Money printing was sent to full blast. We call that quantitative easing, right? AKA money creation, fiat debasement. We saw Bitcoin rip during that. And right now we are in a high interest rate environment and Bitcoin is still ripping. So when that shift happens, we are going to see an absolute explosion in Bitcoin's price. It's going to be literally ridiculous. So that's one thing on the horizon. When it comes to global rates, like I said, usually the US is the leader, but this time other countries have been cutting their interest rates before the US. Global liquidity has been increasing before US liquidity has really had a chance to keep pace, right, on a percentage basis. So you can look all this up for yourself. Don't just trust me, verify it. But at the end of the day, global liquidity is going up. The US is lagging behind. The dollar is becoming less dominant slightly, but the true debasement, the real big print, is not even here yet. That's really important, right? Then I would say that there are companies that are coming into the space. So first we had the ETF leg up. That was in January of 2024. Then we have the institutional leg up, and that is what we're seeing right now in the summer of 2025. We're seeing all these different companies launching Bitcoin treasury strategies because of the regulatory clarity, because of the evidence of success that we see with Strategy, with Similar, with MetaPlanet, right? All these other guys are coming into the space, and we haven't even really had a company of scale come into the space yet and deploy capital. That's going to be extremely meaningful. And again, that's right on the horizon. There's no reason why that would not happen. Okay. You could say that a company like Microsoft doesn't want to take the risk of doing something like that because they already have a successful business with a very low overhead. But if you look at a company like Apple, right? Apple has been struggling recently. Every time that they have an earnings report, all they can do is a stock buyback. And when you adjust for inflation, inflation, their returns have been lackluster and mediocre. All right. They are not keeping up with the hurdle rate. That is the inflation rate. That is the rate of debasement in the economy. Apple would be a great company to pivot to a Bitcoin standard. Meta would be a great company to pivot to a Bitcoin standard. Will these guys do it? It depends on how smart their board of directors are. I'm assuming they're not very bright, so most likely it's not going to happen. Maybe not this year, but what we could also see this year is Strategy continue to expand and get into the S&P 500. This would be major because the amount of passive inflows that they would receive from something like this would just generate more Bitcoin buying pressure. Bitcoin is a finite asset where only 450 are typically made per day or released, emitted per day. The ETFs have 22 times the daily supply, right? They are absorbing 22 times the daily supply. That's not including Strategy. That's not including every other country, every other company in the world, every individual in the world who's buying Bitcoin every single day. The demand cannot keep up with the supply cannot keep up with the amount of demand that we're seeing. That's why we see these breakouts. All right. Yes, some people might say there's paper Bitcoin. They might say that there's rehypothecation going on. These things are very hard to confirm. But what we do know is that there is a finite amount of Bitcoin made every single day. And right now the buying pressure is way too much. And that's what's causing these rapid legs up. And that demand isn't going anywhere. All right. The demand is accelerating because people are realizing what Bitcoin can do. They're realizing the power of Bitcoin, the purpose of Bitcoin. They're watching governments print away their currency's value, right? They're watching the purchasing power of their currency lose value against Bitcoin. All right. They're watching the price of their house lose value against Bitcoin. They're watching the price of their stock portfolio lose value against Bitcoin. And they're watching companies and asset managers adopt Bitcoin and succeed. They're watching countries adopt the Bitcoin standard and succeed. All right. El Salvador has an unrealized gain of hundreds of millions of dollars. They're about to have $1 billion unrealized gain. And that's what's pushing a lot of these people into the space. They're dipping their toes in. Advisors are now recommending 1 to 2%, 3 to 4%. Eventually, as they understand that Bitcoin is the only asset that really has any monetary value, right? As a money, Bitcoin's the best money. That percentage is going to continue to expand. We're going to see 10%, 20%, all the way up until we're seeing 80%, 90% portfolios, right? There's not going to be this 60-40 of stocks and bonds. Bonds are dead. Cash is trash. No one's doing that anymore. It's going to be 60-40, 60% BTC and cold storage, 40% Bitcoin adjacent equities, right? Like MetaPlanet, like Bitcoin backed bonds, right? Those are the bonds people are going to actually want. All right. People are going to want products like Strategy Stride. All right. They're going to want Strike. They're going to want Strife. All right. They're going to want these preferred stocks that issue dividends, right? That have high appreciation, that are self-healing, right? This is what people are going to want. They're going to want Bitcoin adjacent products and Bitcoin and cold storage. There's not enough Bitcoin available for people, so they will be forced to use these Bitcoin adjacent, Bitcoin backed products, which will then generate income for the companies to then go buy more Bitcoin that is available for sale, because there's always going to be a price while fiat exists. Once fiat doesn't exist, then there will be no more price for Bitcoin. And at that point, I don't understand what the business model of a lot of these companies will be, besides being Bitcoin banks, right? But up until that point, right, I do think we're maybe a decade or two away from that. As we move into that future, we need to front run all the big banks, all the big companies, all the tech companies that are coming, all the countries that are coming. We need to front run them. We need to front run them and keep on buying Bitcoin while we can. We're stacking sats while we can. We're buying the top while we can, because this is a local top for us. It'll be a local bottom for someone else. That's just how it goes. All right. And they'll look back and they'll say, oh my gosh, you were so early. You were so lucky. You're able to buy Bitcoin at only 118,000. Yes, I know. Now the price is 2 million. It is what it is. Right. But if you think that there's a crash coming because some guy drew a line on Twitter and he said it's never going past 112,000, that kid's an idiot and you shouldn't be listening to him. If you want to actually take control of your financial future, use the tools in my description. Make sure that you're understanding Bitcoin, researching Bitcoin, because the more you understand it, the more of your net worth gets denominated in Bitcoin, right? So no double top and then a drop off. We're probably going to see more blow off tops, and it's just going to keep on going, especially as we get towards the tail end of this cycle. Maybe the cycles are over, maybe the cycles continue. No one really knows for sure, especially because of things like leverage, right? There's going to be a lot of guys who are leveraged 10 to 1 on Bitcoin. Then some bad news breaks out about some tariff garbage, or Coinbase gets hacked, some sort of bad news story. Then we get this massive spiral downward. It will be bad. That probably will happen, right? That's just because people get greedy. People are idiots. But if you are buying Bitcoin in cold storage, you're good. Nothing can stop this train. Shout out to Lynn Alden. If you know, you know. And if you don't, got to do more research. But that's my take on it. Let me know what you feel in the comment section below. Make sure to share this video with someone who might also find it enjoyable. And I'll see you guys in the next video, my friends. Remember, stack sats or die trying.